welcome everybody this morning to Senate Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources. We've got only two bills on the docket today, and we're going to start off with Senate File 33, defining aircraft for purposes of hunting prohibitions. And I think we might have some agency folks here that might want to talk a little bit about this bill. So welcome, and come on up and introduce yourself. 33, did I say 32?
Oh, there you
go. Okay, yeah. Senate File 33.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Members of the committee, my name is Craig Smith. I'm the Deputy Chief of the Wildlife Division. My understanding of this bill, Senate File 33, was generated during the interim session within the Joint Judiciary Committee. As I understand the purpose, it's basically to ensure the legislature's intent is explicit regarding the inclusion of drones or unmanned air vehicles in the Title 23 definition of aircraft. Currently, the Game and Fish Commission does have rules and regulations promulgated in our Chapter 2 that has basically an identical definition, but the committee wished to put this into statute. We've had this similar definition within commission regulations since approximately 2015, and it seems to have served the commission well. So I'm very brief today, and I would take any questions.
Questions, committee?
Sure.
Yeah, Senator Baldwin.
I hate to see him come all the way up there and not have at least one question. Just a quick question, and I'm sure it's somewhere else I could have read, but I haven't read on the use of drones. And I know Alaska law better than I know Wyoming law, and I apologize for that. But I know for their aircraft, there's a time specification from the time that you fly in on an aircraft and the time you can then hunt. Will that apply to drones in Wyoming, or what laws are on the books about that in Wyoming?
Mr. Smith?
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Baldwin. Wyoming does not have a time period specific like Alaska does. However, there is a section in our commission regulation that basically says no person shall use an aircraft, which would include drone, to spot or locate wildlife or aid in the taking of that wildlife from August 1st until the end of the year, basically during the hunting season. So if someone was to utilize a drone to spot wildlife, it would be considered unlawful.
Follow up?
Sure.
Go ahead.
And I guess I can see maybe a need for a time period, because in my brain here, I'm thinking somebody takes a drone, somebody flies in a helicopter, whatever, 12 hours later, or 8 hours later for that matter, they go back into where they came over and there was a herd of 150 elk. Where does that fit in the law? They then land, they go back in their pickup, and where that elk herd hasn't moved, is that prohibited, or where would you draw the line on that?
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Baldwin, that's a good question. And as you're getting at, it can be extremely difficult to enforce the provisions of using aircraft because we have to prove their intent to spot or locate while they were flying. So enforcing this in the field can be very difficult. Drawing a line is going to be based on the circumstances that are presented to the officer at the time. And so each situation will be different in that aspect, but it can prove to be difficult.
Follow up?
Sure. Would that be beneficial in the future for this committee to maybe look at something to do set a time period such as what Alaska has? Would that be beneficial and make it easier for your guys to enforce those laws easier?
Mr. Smith?
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Baldwin, I would leave that up to the committee. There's a potential there that it could make it better defined so that everyone was on the same page and knew exactly what a time limit would be allowable for that. We don't have a lot of documented cases or issues with it currently, although we do occasionally get a few complaints of someone, but it has proven difficult to prove.
Go ahead, Senator Guru.
Thank you. Now that the good senator brought that up, didn't we do that a couple of years ago? We talked about that, about people who really weren't outfitters who were using drones and using their own just GPS systems to say, you know, do a location coordinate and then say film or take pictures of, you know, a trophy animal, you know, and say, you know, then put it out in the paper and say, you know, $500 and we'll give you the coordinates where this guy eats every day. we did a bill like that, as I recall,
Yeah, I
yeah,
think
2-3
so.
years ago. So I wonder if it just kind of maybe loop back around. That's something we'll take a look at.
Mr. Smith?
Thanks. What say you?
Madam
Don't you
Chairman,
agree?
Senator Grew, thank you. You did pass a legislation a few years ago that included providing geographic locations of animals. So again, there is another route to that, and enforcement wise, if someone is selling those locations, it's unlawful.
Other questions? Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I did not follow this bill as it went through the interim and joint judiciary, but it's a general one of the Game and Fish's ability to write rules. When I look at the existing language, it seems like aircraft could be interpreted broadly through your rulemaking. So I'm wondering if you went through that exercise of trying to say aircraft means X, Y, Z through rules, and if for some reason you received legal counsel that said, no, you need more statutory guidance. I'm just curious because I just don't want to keep revisiting these types of issues in the future. It seems like this might be a good time for us to have the conversation of whether or not we need to say something like, for purposes of the section, aircraft means, any machine or device as defined by agency rule and shall include but is not limited to, and then airplane, helicopter, glider. So I'm just curious, like a little more history on why this wasn't accomplished through rulemaking.
Go ahead, Mr. Smith.
Madam Chairwoman, Senator Ellis. My understanding and knowledge of the bill as it progressed through the interim was pretty simple to include drones in Title 23, even though it was currently in commission rule. So I'm not aware in observing the testimony during the interim that there was discussion about that particular aspect of this. But it certainly could be broadened if we needed to on the definition of aircraft. I guess I don't know how else to answer that. We'd be open to any other suggestions that you might have.
Follow up? No? Okay. Any other questions for Mr. Smith? Yeah, I just have a couple quick ones. And one of them is in the old language. Just wanted to understand a little bit more about the fact that you can exempt handicap hunters for provisions of this. How does that work and how do you keep track of that, I guess?
Madam Chairman, thank you. Great question. So in that particular statute, 23-3306A, it also includes motorized vehicles in that portion of the statute. And currently the commission does have an exemption for handicapped hunters to shoot from a vehicle under certain conditions if they have the proper permit for that. So that's where the exemption comes at this time.
Okay, and just a follow-up question. Is there any issue with your agency knowing, I assume that aircraft, when they're hunting predatory animals, they might have to have permission, or do they? I guess that's the question, when they're actually out there, if it's someone that's providing, whether it's a rancher or someone else, do they have to get permission to do that?
Madam Chairwoman, the answer is yes, there is a permit that's required. There's also the Airborne Hunting Act, which is under the Code of Federal Regulations, which sets up the sideboards and the requirements for people to hunt predatory animals from aircraft, and that does require permission for that to occur.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much for your
Thank you.
testimony. Appreciate it. Anyone else in the room that would like to testify on this bill? It's earth-shattering. Do we have anybody online at all who'd like to testify? All right, then I guess we'll go ahead and wait for Senator Baldwin said to go ahead and move the bill. So let's go ahead and walk through the bill. Testimony's closed, public. Page 1, excuse me. Yeah, Senator Baldwin did. Yeah, I barely heard it. He's so quiet with his new voice, so. Any questions on page 1? There's no changes there at all, but any comments? No. Okay. And the meat of this bill is on page 2, lines 10 through 15. Any issues or any potential amendments or anything that you see issues with? No question. Okay. We'll go ahead and call question on the bill then.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate File 33, Senator Baldwin,
Aye.
Senator Ellis,
Aye.
Senator Garu,
Aye.
Senator Jones, and Chairman Schuler.
Aye.
We have 5 ayes.
Thank you. Bill's passed. Anyone interested in carrying this on the floor? Any interest? Anybody? Anybody?
I'll do it if I have a
Oh,
voice.
there you go. Okay, so Senator Baldwin has a voice. He will carry this one, so. And again, we may want to take a look at that. That's an interesting thought you brought up about Alaska and what they do, so it might be something for the future. All right, with that, we'll go ahead and move on to Senate File 113, Architects Practice Act Amendments. And I believe the good senator from Cheyenne is here. This is his bill, and we're anxious to hear what you got to say, Senator Pappas.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and committee. This Architects Practice Act bill was basically spawned from both the profession and from the state board who wanted to change a few things in their Practice Act. Most of them are technical in nature. They do clean up. We're not changing the practice of architecture in any way, or landscape architecture. Remember, this board deals with both licensed architects and landscape architects. So I have also, I don't know if it's been distributed, there's letters of support both from NCARB, and I'm going to use a couple of acronyms. NCARB is the National Council of Architectural Registration Boards. That's the council that registers all architects, all our board. Wyoming is, our board is a member of this organization, as is, there's 55 members, all states and 5 jurisdictions that are members of NCARB, and they have reciprocity amongst the states and territories through this organization. And CLARB, which is a council of landscape architects, is similar on the landscape architect side. So I don't have a letter of support from them, but they do support this. NCARB sent a letter, and also you'll see a letter from AIA Wyoming. That's our professional association, and it's the AIA is a national organization. AIA Wyoming is our Wyoming chapter. So with that, let me explain the bill a little bit. There's 3 things that happen in this bill, and while we'll just walk through it as I explain it, if that's okay, Madam Chair. So the bill you'll see will amend qualifications of persons applying to become a licensed architect or landscape architect, remove some requirements for notified pending license expirations, and it authorizes the board to use annual renewal fees to do some continuing education. So on to page 1, we do have basically page 1 deals with the ability to allow architects to or architects who are looking to become people who are looking to become architects to sit for the examination prior to finishing getting their degree. This is something that is happening everywhere. They're allowing the students to actually sit for the exam while this actually book knowledge is fresh in their minds. And this little change would allow Wyoming to enter those group of states that are now starting to move towards that. Second of all, it allows for an alternate path to licensure from the accredited professional degree model that we have right now. And we had this model prior to, I forgot when we changed it, but for instance, my father was a licensed architect in this state. He never had an architectural degree. He had a civil engineering degree, but he spent so many years in the architectural field that he got in under an alternate path. So he got his experience through practical means. Well, NCARB now and NCLARB as well have alternate paths that are available, okay? And they're certainly approved by the national organizations. Some states are now going back to them. Some states are getting away from them. It all depends on the state. Wyoming is seeking to bring back the ability to license an architect based on alternate methods. It still requires the testing. It still requires years of practical experience, pretty much like internship program. It requires more years of internship if you don't have the degree. And so anyhow, you'll see that basically the bulk of the language in line 12 through 17 on page 2, allowing that alternative method. So then on to the second point that this bill is trying to do, and that's to authorize the use of revenue that the board has for professional continuing education. And you have to remember that these funds are not state funds. These funds are actual funds that are raised through license fees. So they're funds that the professionals in the profession contribute to licensure. And so the ability to use license fees towards professional education is something that the board is seeking to do. And you'll see that, I believe that's, where do we show that? You see that on page 4, line 18, the board may use up to 1/2 of its annual renewal fees for the purpose of contracting for higher education or professional organizations to provide this service. Again, it's a may. If they need the funds to run the board, they won't have it, but at times they have excess funds that they can use to help continue the education of architects in this state. And then the final thing that is requested in the bill, and you can that's on page 3, actually, the bottom part of the page, and that allows for the ability to provide renewal notices via email or any other way. Right now, it's required that they send out certified mail to anybody who has not renewed within the last 2 weeks. And I believe the number that I've heard, and the board could probably speak to this, but 60% of the architects don't renew until the last 2 weeks. I mean, we're all a little bit lazy and we wait till the last minute. Well, it costs the board, I think it's the latest rates are $7.82 a letter. And when you're sending out thousands of these letters, it's very expensive for the board. So we're trying to remove the requirement to have to send out that certified letter in the last 2 weeks. And frankly, the architects that I spoke said, I'd rather get an email anyhow. And most of them intend to pay, but they just don't pay till the last minute. So those are the 3 things that the bill does. And I can certainly sit for questions if you have any.
Questions for Senator Pappas? Yeah, go ahead, Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Senator Pappas. Just going back to page 3, I know that you're talking about email notification or digital notification of renewal, but now it would appear that there's no requirement to notify them at all. Now you've taken the mail out. So is it written somewhere else, or is there just no requirement? If they don't notify you, they don't notify you?
No, well, I'll let the board, I guess, speak to that. I don't know, there is I think there is still a requirement for the first renewal of the board may waive the continuing education requirement. No, wait a minute. I'll let the board explain it. They know better.
Okay.
So I don't think the board would not send out an email. I think they intend to, but if we need to put some of that language in there that they must contact them, if it's not already in there, it may be somewhere else that I don't know of.
Madam
Yeah,
Chairman,
go ahead,
I was
follow
just
it.
gonna say, maybe we can just take the mail portion out and leave the notification part in. That would be I'll suggest that amendment when we get
Okay.
there.
Other questions for Senator?
Yes.
Oh, go ahead, Senator Guerrero.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Senator, on page 2, line 12, that's where you're talking about the alternate
Right.
education. Talk to me a little bit about, drop down to line 16, 17, those little words there at the end, as the board deems appropriate. I understand all that stuff up above it, so give me an example of what the board would deem appropriate, that they would, I mean, I know the national, you talked about national standards, you talked about alternative paths. Talk to me about as the board deems, and my question, I'm not trying to be gotcha here, but it seemed like if a board wanted to, they could kind of go the other way with that and say, well, you've got to be a licensed architect for X number of years, and
I
I
think,
worry about those open lines like that. So just help me.
Madam Chair.
Go ahead, Senator Pappas.
So the language prior to the insertion was from accredited School of Architecture or Landscape Art with practical experience as the board deems appropriate. So there was different levels of practical experience, right? And that's pretty much, we're adding an examination. Examination is a given. I don't think the as appropriate language deals with anything about the examination. But certainly the state board has the ability to determine what practical experience, there's a minimum requirement that NCARB recommends, NCLARB, but the board certainly could change that, in my mind, as they deem necessary. But right now, they can't even do that because there is no alternate method allowed. So I think we want to give them the flexibility to decide for themselves what's appropriate when it comes to this alternate method, but without allowing them to use an alternate method.
Thank
I don't
you.
know if that,
No, that does.
follow-up?
Thank you.
okay.
Any other questions for Senator Pappas? I have just a couple quick ones. First of all, I like the idea of the students being able to test before they actually get out there on the job. Is there a timeline in terms of, could they do it their junior year, senior year? Is that just open-ended, or how does that work?
Again, I don't know the mechanics and the timing. Again, the state board could probably give you all the particulars. It's been a while since I've taken the exam. And certainly the exam now is electronic. And it can be, and it's in multiple pieces, so you can take it over time. At least the last I knew, I haven't been involved in the exam, frankly, since I was on the national committee to write questions for the national exam when I was a board member of NCARB. But the ability to take it when they're in school is something that a lot of professions are actually going to. I think the engineers have that ability as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Also, and you may have already answered this, I think you may have mentioned NCARB possibly. Is there a minimum number of years of internship that they'll consider if they don't have a degree, or is it just up to the board on that?
Yes, there are a minimum number of years, yes. I believe I actually have a chart here. So, my chart is CLARB. I'll ask the state board when they get up to speak, I'll ask them to answer that question. But there are minimum number of years.
Great, okay, thank you. Anything else?
Madam Chair.
Oh, go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair. One other question. Is some of this, what's drive motivation to get this bill passed in response to maybe a lack of architectures in Wyoming? Or is it really just to reflect, just providing more flexibility for those wanting to enter the field?
Again, I know the state board has been working on this language for a couple of years, so it's been they've been thinking about it for a long time. I'm not so sure that it's an actual need to provide relief for the lack of architects in the state. We do have very few architects in the state. I believe I do have a chart with a lot of numbers about how many licensed folks are in the state, and by far the licensed residents are like, I don't know, 10%, and most other licenses are out of the state or something like that. It's a big disparate, and I think that the intent here is to, number one, start the examination early, because that's kind of where everyone's going. Number two is to allow the use of the funds to do continuing education, which I think is healthy for the profession. And number three is to save some money and not having to put out the almost $8 letter mailers. So again, I think these are more technical corrections. Not so sure it's aimed at trying to look at bringing more architects in.
Oh, just one last question, I think, for me is, when you talked about the continuing education, I just wondered, can they get that anywhere? Can they get it online? I mean, is there somebody like University of Wyoming that does it in-state? Where do they get their continuing education? And I like the idea of being able to use those fees to help out with that.
Madam Chair,
Senator Paul.
most architects, and I can't speak to the landscape architects, but most architects get their continuing education through the association, through the American Institute of Architects. Now, you don't have to. A lot of companies will provide, for instance, I've had a lot of roofing companies, for instance, come into my firm, and they'll give a noon hour lunch presentation, but it has to be under the auspices of the AIA. They have very strict guidelines about what needs to be in the education, and so you can't be like just pushing your product. The education has to deal with specifics of for instance, roofing. There has to be some learning about roofing materials, roofing installation, whatever. And you have to submit this stuff to AIA. They go through the program, and then they will allow you to be an accredited deliverer of that particular education. So it's pretty strict they go through a formal process. I know every time we put on a meeting, we have architects meetings throughout the state, and we offer continuing education. We have to provide documentation to the national AIA and give it approval for what we're going to get, or else we won't get those hours. And then, of course, the state requires continuing education to maintain your license. So architects are required to do this. It varies amongst the states how many hours, but they are required.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Senator Pappas? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Anyone else that would like to testify on this bill? Come on up, introduce yourself and. Morning, welcome.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Emily Crombaugh. I'm the Executive Director of the Wyoming Board of Architects and Landscape Architects. I'm happy to answer any questions, but I do have an architect board member and a landscape architect board member available virtually. and you may wish to hear from them instead. Ms. Katie Wilson and Ms. Allison Fleury.
Do you have any questions for Emily first before we go to the members of the board? Yeah, go ahead, Senator
Yeah,
Ellis.
thank you, Madam Chair. Just to pick up from Senator Baldwin's inquiry, I think he made a really good catch on page 3. Was your intent in working on this bill, or the intent of the work group that I'm guessing that you've been involved with, to eliminate any notification requirements, or was it just the mail piece and the certified mail piece?
Emily?
Madam Chair and Senator Ellis, the board's intent is never to remove the opportunity to provide notice. Renewals go much more smoothly when we provide notice. We do mail notices out at least 3 months before, in excess of the 2 required. And then the last several weeks of the renewal period, I also send multiple emails. The intent is to have the licensees receive every opportunity to renew. They do excel with multiple reminders.
And follow up, Madam Chair?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead. Senator.
I'm guessing, is that all, or is a licensee able to renew by paying online, or do they have to submit a check? I'm just wondering how automated you are.
Ms. Cornbrough?
Madam Chair and Senator Ellis, right now, we do not have online capabilities. Our office is working to get back there. We had it previously and had some contract issues. So presently, they do renew via paper method with a check.
And then one last question, Madam
Go ahead.
Chair. So I'm looking just at the bottom of page 3, 2 months before, and you said you do it up to 3 multiple email reminders, and then you're within that 2-week period, you're just going to start sending more emails. What happens when that person just doesn't respond, doesn't pay? Then how do you notify? Is that written out in rule, or is that written out elsewhere in statute of you're done, we're taking your license away? Or I'm curious to know how that works.
Go ahead, Ms. Cornbrough.
Madam Chair and Senator Ellis, at present, because we send the multiple reminders and they receive documentation every time they do renew with their current expiration date, the final reminder emails go out, say, this is your last opportunity to renew. We do provide instructions saying if you are unable to or you do not renew, you will have to apply for reissuance. And all of that information is on the website as well. We don't do a second follow-up if they haven't, because they've received so many notices.
Okay. Go ahead, Senator.
Thank you. I'm an attorney, so I'm just kind of curious how it all works for you instead of us. But along those lines, do you ever have someone who says, that's what my concern is. You took away my license. This is a big deal in my day-to-day life. I never got these emails. They went to my junk folder. I'm just wanting to think that through, because it is a big deal, and we don't want to have that person have to go before the Office of Administrative Hearings and Appeals and just save everybody that headache. So I would like to know that process really well, so that we're not jumping into something that's kind of goofy.
Ms. Cornbrough.
Madam Chair and Senator Ellis, the board does have a requirement and rule that licensees are required to notify the board of any changes in their address, email, and phone number, so that we don't run into these issues as much. However, as you're aware, we still do. In those situations, they may say they haven't received it. Staff does try to verify, did we have correct information? If it should be a staff error, say perhaps we entered the wrong mailing address so they didn't receive it, the board office will work with them to rectify that renewal, because that was not their error. Typically, though, the licensees are on vacation the last several weeks of December, weren't getting notices because they aren't checking, they forgot, or architects and landscape architects are typically licensed in at least 10 plus jurisdictions. They may confuse which state they renewed and what they didn't. So in those circumstances, when it was not the board's fault, the licensee missed the notices for whatever reason, staff does do everything we can to issue those reissuances immediately, so that we aren't stopping that person from practicing. We haven't gone to administrative hearings for those issues in my whole time. It's typically a matter of we just communicate what they need to do to get that license active again, and then we process it. I'm not sure if that really answered your question, though.
Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Follow up. And one last question. Is there a fee associated? If they're after the deadline, you have to do now all this extra work. Do you charge them some kind of penalty or fee for being out of compliance for that past the deadline?
Go ahead, Ms. Cornbrough.
Madam Chair and Senator Ellis, there is a reissuance application fee. We've now stopped the renewal process at that deadline. And then there's a reissuance process, which has a higher fee. So yes.
Any other questions for Ms. Cornbrough? Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Other testimony? Welcome.
Welcome.
Introduce yourself, even though I know you, but the other
Thank you,
folks might
Chairman.
not.
Chairwoman Schuler and committee, very much appreciate being here. My name is Arne Jorgensen. Many of you see me in the halls as a town councilman in Jackson. I'm not here in that context. I am here as an architect and also having served 12 and a half plus years on the State Board of Architects. No longer doing that, so I have a little more flexibility to come and speak to you. I'm here very much in speaking in support of the work of my former colleagues and my current colleagues on that state board. And also, in particular, when I was on the state board, I was very involved with NCARB and those committees, and I was chairing the national committee that implemented the alternative plans and terminal procedures that NCARB managed. And in that process, there was a continual effort to streamline them, make them more effective, make them less expensive, with the goal of ultimately getting to a standard that all of the jurisdictions could sign up to. That process was fascinating, and it was interesting. We got to pretty much the end of it, and it didn't make it through the association process, in part because it didn't meet the needs of smaller states. And I'm proud of the fact that we stood up and said, no, this isn't meeting our needs. The following year, the organization created a task force of 5 people. I was fortunate to be one of those, and made some tweaks and came back and was successful in getting that through. And this language, the reciprocity language and the alternative path language, is a direct result of now Wyoming being able to come into alignment with that, allow people in the state of Wyoming to apply directly. They could apply through another state, but if you were in Wyoming, you'd have to go to Colorado and then come back in. And the real goal here is, I mean, Chairwoman, you asked a question about number of years, and that's a great example. At the time, there were 13 states that had these alternative paths, and you can imagine what they each looked like. And a big part of that was, let's come up with the number of years that makes sense. And that was a big part of this effort. So I'm very proud to be supportive of this process where it sits at the moment. And it just streamlines the opportunity for issuance between states, and it's something that I'm very proud of our industry and the landscape architects in moving this forward. And I don't think you see a lot of movement for compact language in architects because we kind of have it dealt with through this association. So I'm very proud to be here and stand for questions.
Questions for Mr. Jorgensen? Well, thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Anyone else in the room that would like to testify? All righty, then I guess we'll go to online. I guess we have a couple folks, don't we, still online?
Madam Chairman, we have Kate Wilson and Allison Fleury.
Okay, go ahead and let them in. Okay, let's start with Katie first.
Yeah. Madam Chairwoman, Senators, thank you for taking the time to review our bill. It's greatly appreciated. And I think these are really positive changes for our state. Just for one example, we currently require an accredited degree in architecture, which the state of Wyoming does not currently offer. And it's an expensive out-of-state tuition, and something like these changes here would allow a student from the University of Wyoming to, take their practical experience or start at a community college or trade school and use those credits towards their education. So I feel like this education piece is a huge barrier for many folks that want to become architects. And I also want to be firm in making sure people understand that this is not being watered down. Yes, design is, I could talk all day about the benefit of design, but as our regulatory board, we are here to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. And architects and landscape architects play different roles. Yes, some are very design focused. Other times we're just focusing on really making sure that a building has proper egress, proper accessibility, and some of those basic codes. So again, this piece, nothing's being watered down. You're still going to have rigorous standards for examination and extensive experience before you're allowed to call yourself an architect. But this does open the door and take down at least one barrier. And other pieces, again, we're required to maintain our license. We need to have continuing education. We'd love to use some of those funds to, raise the bar for our professionals, as well as helping the general public understand what architects and landscape architects do. And the last piece is just an administrative piece. Yes, want to make it notices will still go out. And not to be harsh, but we are aware of the expiration date of our licenses, and it is our responsibility as professionals to keep track of that. So the notifications are just a wonderful benefit that are not going away. And I also stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. Questions from the committee? Okay, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Let's go to Allison. I didn't catch your last name, so.
Madam Chairwoman, I am Allison Fleury. I am a licensed landscape architect. I reside in Wilson, Wyoming. And I stand in support of this bill. I think it's a really great way to get Wyoming in compliance with the model law of our national organizations. I know we have the support of ASLA Colorado, which is it's ASLA Colorado and Wyoming. I think opening these alternative paths to licensure is just a great way to get more people into our profession that have met these standards. It's sad to see people that have, 8 or 10 years of experience and they cannot get licensed because they chose an alternative path to get their education. So I think it's great. The continuing education, especially being a landscape architect, if there's few architects in Wyoming, there's a lot fewer landscape architects. And we get, I would say, all of our continuing ed online or attending the national conference because we don't have a chapter here in Wyoming. We'd have to travel even to Colorado. So the board being able to offer high quality continuing education is just a great idea. And certified mail, yeah, we don't need that. So that's all. And I stand for questions.
Questions for Ms. Fleury? Certainly sounds like a cost-saving issue, not having to send out the certified letter, so I think that's important. Thank you so much for your testimony. I don't see any questions, so thanks for coming on and giving us your time. Appreciate it. Okay, we've heard testimony. We'll go ahead and close it. I guess there's nobody else in the room, so what would you like to do with this bill?
Madam Chair, I'd like to move it.
Okay, we're going to move the bill. Senator Ellis? Move it. Let's take a look at it. Is there any potential issues or amendments or anything you'd like to take? Senator Baldwin?
On page 3, Madam Chairman.
Okay.
Page 3, line 15. After license period, I would reinsert the secretary of the board shall notify each registrant and then leave the by mail, leave that crossed out. So notify each registrant, at least 2 months prior to the date of the expiration of his license period. And then on the same page, essentially the same thing down on line 21. Oh, I gotta figure myself out here. The secretary of the board shall again notify the registrant and leave by certified mail crossed out and reinsert at least 2 weeks before the expiration date, I believe is on the next page, on page 4.
Okay.
So I would, if that makes sense. Did that make sense?
Did you get that, Doreen? Okay, go ahead.
I'll just read it.
Okay.
Starting in line 15, renewal of a license period. The secretary of the board shall notify each registrant at least 2 months prior to the date of the expiration of his license. And then going down to line 21, provided, however, that the secretary of the board shall again notify the registrant at least 2 weeks before the expiration date.
Is that better? All right, great. Okay. All those in favor of that amendment, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Fair enough. That amendment has been adopted. Anything else? Page 2 or 3 or 4? No? All right. Let's go ahead and then if there's no other changes or amendments, let's go ahead and take a roll call vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senate File 113, Senator Baldwin.
Aye.
Senator Ellis.
Aye.
Senator Guru.
Aye.
Senator Jones. And Chairman Schuler.
Aye.
We have the 5 ayes.
Okay, thank you. That bill is passed. And I assume, Senator Pappas, you'd like to carry this on the floor? Is that correct? Senator Pappas? I assume you'd like to, okay, good. Just wanted to make sure. All right, thank you so much. Anything else from our committee? I don't know, I think we may have a couple more bills coming down the pike for Thursday, but yeah, we've got, gosh, maybe we could start at 9 instead of 8. No, I probably should, we probably should stay with just 8, I guess. Well, we could go at 9? If we only have 2 bills, we may just do that. We may just start at 9. Okay.
There's more bills being read in today.
Yeah, that's true. So, all right, well, thank you, everyone, for coming, and appreciate it. This meeting is adjourned.